Hi, welcome to the Cult of Inquiry podcast. My name is Dave, and I'm your host, and I will be your co-conspirator here, your tour guide, if you like, on this journey of question asking, idea exploring, and really going deep on what it means to switch yourself on and live in the path of awakening as a Westerner at this time in the world. Okay, let's get it. So this is a personal development podcast, if you will, for all my freaks, for all my weirdos, for all my artists, for all my creatives, for all my musicians, for all my genius, brilliant thinkers, for all my philosophers, for all my friends, for all the people that I've seen out there that I know are these deep, bright, amazing, courageous, fearless, bold, badass, free-thinking, willing to explore ideas people. This is for you. This is for you if you're an introvert, if you're somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about life or thinking about yourself or trying to heal your past or trying to sort your head out or really wanting to be a good person in a terrible world, then this is for you. If you're somebody who's a little sarcastic and a little real and a little deep and maybe a little dark and a little edgy, maybe you're a little fierce, but you're also a big sweetheart. You're someone who's smart, you're someone who's capable, and someone who's maybe glimpsed the real beauty and the real power and the real goodness that you carry inside of you, but you're still working through it like the rest of us, then this is for you too. This is for anybody out there who wants to dive deep, who wants to think profoundly, who wants to boldly explore ideas, who wants to look at things we may have thought of before from a different light or a different lens, and has the courage to go deep, whether that means going into the shadow or that means going deep into the beauty, into the light, into the goodness, and not wincing or cringing either way. If you're open to all of that, then I welcome you, and I'm honored to have you on this journey with me. And it's truly a pleasure to be able to have this conversation with you. But don't let me tell you who I think you are. I want you to contact me and tell me who you are. Show me who you are. Get in touch and let me know who you are so I can understand who it is I'm having this conversation with. It would be absolutely amazing to get some feedback about the podcast and what you like, what you don't like, so that I can tailor make this conversation to my listeners. So let's go ahead and get on with it. One quick caveat, though, I should probably lay out there for all you guys. If you're super sensitive, if you're easily triggered, easily offended, if you're unwilling to explore ideas because you have some sort of rigid taboo, this may not be the conversation for you. This may not be the podcast for you. I certainly want to treat every topic and every conversation with humility and respect and open-mindedness and an open heart. But I want you to know that's my intention, to really get into the juice here, to really get into this conversation with you, and to really open up and be willing to look at and explore any idea and every idea from different angles until we arrive at that shining kernel of the truth. And if that means that, we end up disrupting bad ideas along the way, I'm okay with that. And if that means that we put some idea under the fire of inquiry and it comes out still true on the other side, then that's even better, because then we know it's solid and it's useful and it's true. So if you have the heart for that kind of thing, then please listen on. But if you don't, if you're somebody who can't have the world be questioned too much, or it will upset you and disrupt you, if you don't have that kind of courage, then I would definitely suggest that this may not be the podcast for you, and you might be better off going and finding a podcast that's a little sweeter, a little gentler, a little lighter. Not to say that we won't be sweet and gentle and light here, but just that this is a full range conversation and anything goes. Nothing is sacred in our quest for the truth. Okay, so with the caveats out of the way, I wanted to just take a moment, since this is the first podcast and I'm setting up this conversation with you guys, to explain to you why I called it the Cult of Inquiry, kind of where I'm coming from with that. So besides it just being kind of like a catchy, somewhat edgy, somewhat dark name that just kind of stuck with me the moment I thought of it, there's a couple other reasons that I wanted to call this podcast what I've named it and why I've named it that. So the first thing is that inquiry is one of the most powerful tools we have as a free, autonomous human being. I think it's one of our greatest gifts, our greatest mental skills that we have. And if we don't cultivate it and use it and sharpen it like a beautiful blade, then it becomes dull over time. And the quality of our understanding of the world goes down. See, there's a weird, freaky thing that happens when you ask a question. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but if you ask yourself a question or somebody asks you a question, somewhere in you an answer pops up immediately. Our brains can't help but answer questions. They just do automatically every single time. It doesn't mean that the answer is going to be good or correct or accurate or useful, but our brain will always spit out an answer when it's supposed to question. So if we take a hold of that tool and we use it to look at ourselves and to look at the world around us, we're able to pull out all kinds of wisdom that our brain has and that our being has that we may not normally be accessing. So inquiry is our pathway into wisdom. It's kind of the old school traditional pathway into wisdom. I'm sure you know that. And so I figured that that would be such a cool way to get into exploring ideas. The other thing is that we can really use that as a launching point to explore an idea, not so much like this is, here I am and I'm going to teach you what I think. It's more like I'm bringing up these topics and I'm bringing them up in an open-ended light where I have some information I want to share with you, some insight, some dynamic, some, piece of information from all my studies and all my learnings that I want to talk with you about, the way I would talk with any of my friends that I've had these kind of deep conversations with over the years. And together we inquire, and together we explore the idea. I think that's really where real truth emerges and real learning happens, is in the mutual exploring of an idea instead of two people just saying this is how it is and kind of going back and forth and battling about whether something's right or wrong. I think the real juice is in that inquiry, in that question asking. The third reason that I called it the cult of inquiry is that I see a lot of personal development stuff out there as being kind of a cult of personality, where it's very much about the coach or the teacher or the whatever it is. And the bigger the personality, the more the audience gets sucked into it. But I think that that's really a flawed, unsustainable model of mental health and personal development and personal growth. I think the way forward for personal development and personal growth has to become something that is a skill that every single person can do for themselves and we can do together. Because the reality is our needs for mental health in our society and in our culture are, I'm tempted to say greater than ever before, but let's just say very clear that we need them at this time in our culture, right? It's very obvious that there are a lot of mental health struggles and issues out there that need service, that need serving. And so, unfortunately, there's just not enough therapists and coaches to go around serving everybody. So it's an unsustainable model. But what we can do instead is we can start to cultivate a skill of self-therapy, if you will, of self-inquiry, of self-growth, of self-transformation, and we can mutually bolster and help each other along that path. And so instead of a cult of personality, where it's about some therapist or some self-centered coach who kind of has this air of being an expert and then this kind of like implication that you don't know yourself. I think it's much more useful when we all begin to dive in and dig into our own path, which is what I see in so many people out there in the world. And as we dive into our path, we communicate about it with each other. So that's a bit of what I want to do with this podcast, is initiate that conversation, bring what I've learned to the table, explore different ideas from different angles, learn to see the world more clearly, learn to see ourselves more clearly, and really help foster that process of self-awakening and self-actualization that is so needed in this time. Okay, so now that we have the kind of main introduction and vibe setting up out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the meat of this week's topic. So I have been a student of personal development, of self-help and spirituality and Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy and personal growth from different angles for decades. And I've worked as a life coach. I've worked, helping people to transform their lives, and it's amazing. I love it. It's such a profound way to spend my time. And even beyond that work, just as a human being, I'm somebody who is constantly inquiring, constantly asking questions about life and looking and trying to figure out and understand and really wrap my head around and open my heart to the human experience. And so I've been thinking about, if I could try to sum up all the stuff I've learned about personal development, if I could boil all of what I know about this weird, freaky creature we call a human being and the issues that we have in this day and age, if I could boil all of that down to one principle, if I could name the one thing that I think is the difference, that makes the difference, like out of all the things, or the one thing that I think sums up where our issues lie, what would it be? Now, I know that sounds like an incredibly arrogant thing, but that was really the question that popped in my head. And so that is our first question here. The first inquiry I want to offer up into this conversation is, what is the one operative aspect of human psychology that makes all the difference in terms of growth or stuckness? And like I just said, the moment you ask yourself a question, typically your brain will also spit out an answer. And in this case, when I had this thought, of course, right away, my brain spat out an answer with it, and it was so right on. It was so clear. It was so obvious to me that this really is the operative thing, where people get stuck. Because I see this all the time. I see people, whether it's friends of mine, whether it's family members of mine, whether it's, just people in life. I see people online who are just like stuck in a mode of being and not progressing, not growing, not evolving, and struggling with, anxiety, depression, whatever the kind of emerging issues out of that stuckness are. And so it's like, why do we get stuck? What causes us to get stuck? And I think the answer is confirmation bias. So let me explain to you what that is. You may have heard the term confirmation bias before. You may have a sense of what it means. You may know exactly what it means, or you may not. But just in case you don't, I wanted to read you the dictionary definition of it and kind of give you a sense of what I mean when I say confirmation bias. So just to set this up really quickly, I don't know if you know, but there's a bunch, probably more than 50 at least, different types of what we call cognitive biases. So you can think of a cognitive bias as a natural way that the brain works. So these are tendencies that the brain goes down naturally. So these are kind of like working with the grain of the wood, if you will, of our brain. So one of the major cognitive biases that we have is confirmation bias. So I know that's confusing. Cognitive bias, confirmation bias. And what confirmation bias is, according to the dictionary, is it's the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of something that we already believe or have as a theory. So whenever we get new information, we try to fit it in to what we already think or believe. That's confirmation bias. And so, another way you can put that kind of puts it into perspective is that confirmation bias is the process of rationalization. I mean, that's maybe, if you talk to some hardcore, doctorate in psychology, they may disagree and say there's a nuance there. But I think functionally speaking, they're pretty much the same thing. When you are in confirmation bias, you're trying to fit in new information into what you already think and believe. And that's essentially what rationalization is too. We are taking something we did or something that happened, and we are fitting it into a narrative. So it's the process of fitting life or information or experience into a preset chunk of ideas. And this is the very process that I think makes us stuck. I see it over and over and over. I mean, if you just think about it for a moment, if you have a preset kind of chunk or set of beliefs about yourself and about the world and about the way things are, and then any new information you experience has to be fit in to what you already believe, what that means is that you don't grow. In order to grow, you have to be willing to be wrong. You have to be willing to be proven wrong. You have to be willing to be at least open to the idea that you're wrong and that the information you have is incorrect and needs to be updated or changed or revised or thrown out altogether. If you're not willing to take that chance and open your mind to that, then you can't grow, because you can't take in new experiences if you're locked down into confirmation bias. It's like our ability to be a sponge and soak up new information and new wisdom and new life experience that teaches us firsthand goes away. It's like our pores shrink and we lock it out and we become stagnant, static, kind of like an object. And confirmation bias is at the heart of judgment. It's at the heart of the way we look at others and filter out anything that doesn't fit our preconceived notion of how life should be and how it is. Well, anytime we're looking at something else and saying that's wrong, we are in confirmation bias. So another angle on this, of course, is being a child. And if you think about it, children have less life experience, right? So we're less filled with experiences to attach new experiences to. So we don't have as many reference experiences in the back of our mind to draw upon and use in order to make opinions about new experiences. So a child, instead of drawing on all these reference experiences and then comparing and contrasting the world and categorizing the world based on what they've already seen, instead, a child isn't like that. What a child does is a child is in the raw experience, trying to sift out what they think about it immediately or right afterwards for the first time. So instead of having this experience of confirmation bias, of filtering out anything that doesn't already fit with what they think they know, a child, part of the reason that a child is in that experience of wonder and magic and awe and curiosity and kind of overwhelm and sensitivity to the world is because they are processing information raw and new and live and direct. And I would offer the question, what if that's part of why we lose that childhood innocence. That's part of why we lose that sense of magic and that sense of wonder and beauty in the world, that sense of mystery, is because we've traded that direct life experience for holding on to a set of ideas that gives us a sense of stability. And we're so hung up on referencing that sense of stability that we're actually losing out on directly experiencing life fully. And I know I'm repeating myself here, but it really bears repeating again. What if this is what's holding us back in terms of self-actualization, in terms of growing quickly, in terms of letting go of the kind of shit and the shitty patterns that we've been running for years and years and years that we hate about our lives and we know we don't like and we know other people don't like about us, yet we keep doing them over and over and over? What if so much of that is rooted in confirmation bias? Let me give an example of what I mean. What if the sense of self that we construct, right, is then built around doing whatever we have to do to reaffirm that construction, right? I really think that the ego, if you want to get into it, and I'll probably do a separate podcast just on this, let me know if you want me to do it. I really think that the ego is made up of two major components. So I think the ego, as we know it, it's actually the process, right? It's an immediate process that we're generating all the time with our brains. That is really two processes underneath the hood. The first process is creating a narrative about ourselves. So we create a meaning, we create a narrative about who we are that includes the continuity of all our experiences and all our histories. And we use all of that to make a story about who, quote unquote, I am, right? So that's the first part of the ego. The second part of the ego is the confirmation bias part. It's the aspect of using the confirming mechanism in the brain to filter all of life back into feedback into that narrative that we've constructed. So we're constantly filtering out any opportunity, any new information, any new experience, anything we might have been exposed to that could help us grow or contribute to us. We filter that stuff out if it doesn't fit our preconceived notions of who we think we are. And it's this process of using confirmation bias to bolster this constructed sense of identity that I think really lies at the heart of why we get stuck in the first place. As a coach, I can tell you when a client comes in and they're having problems and they're stuck, the majority of my work is just helping them get out of their own construction of their sense of self, to step outside of it for a moment and look at it, and to get out of that process of confirmation bias, of reinforcing how they think the world is. Because if you think about it, if a person is having problems, then that means in that area of their life, at least, that their model or their sense of how the world isn't entirely accurate. Couldn't be entirely accurate, or they would be getting different results. If other people can get other results in that same area that are better, then that means that maybe the story that I'm telling myself and that I keep reasserting is true isn't right, isn't accurate, right? Or isn't the whole story, or maybe was true in the past but is no longer true in the future. Or if you really want to get deep, is only one of a multitude of infinite different types of stories that can all be true in that area of life. And so confirmation bias is that filtering mechanism where we filter out most of life. We say, fuck it. No, I can't deal with all that information. I'm just going to go with what I already know, even though it doesn't serve me, even though it causes me suffering, even though it causes me pain, even though it causes me confusion, or to be stuck, or to be lost, or in terror, or all the different things that I see people going through, that I go through, that I know all of us go through. And it's like, at the heart of it, it's just that we are reasserting and reaffirming a bad story. And confirmation bias is that process, is the process of being biased towards fitting life into your story. So as a coach, it's really basically my job to get people out of confirmation bias and into that sense of their expanded self, their expanded sense of possibility, so that they can examine other possibilities and other ways of being and make a better choice, make a new decision that they like more, that gets them closer to where they want to be. That's the whole gig. That's all the crazy hypnosis techniques and neurolinguistic programming techniques and therapy. All of that really boils down to getting people out of trying to reaffirm and reassert this one way of being and open up so that they can try out other ways of being and find the way of being that works for them. That's really all it is. I mean, if you think about it, why are coaches so often provocateurs? Or why are therapists so often provocateurs? Or why are teachers who are really good teachers so often so upsetting? And while we need them, they can kind of trigger us. Why is that such a common phenomenon in the world of personal growth? Why are spiritual teachers, especially, like if you go to India, or you go to, South America and you go to the jungle, you go take ayahuasca, you're definitely going to get disrupted. You're definitely going to get challenged by the ayahuasca spirit, and it's going to poke holes all over the place in terms of your narrative of how you think life is and show you otherwise, like very powerfully so. Obviously, to a lesser degree, that's true in the psychedelic experience. That's true when we meditate and we just notice that our brain goes on autopilot of spitting out these stories even while we're trying to be still. So I hope you're starting to get a sense of why I think that confirmation bias is at the root, might be the one thing that if we could conquer, that if we can master how to get past, that we could really turbocharge our growth. We could really radically transform our lives and our sense of self and our experience of life and our ability to learn new things and like quantum leap as a human being. I hope you're starting to get a sense of how that might be possible if we can disarm or let go or relax the contracted muscles that are holding on so tightly in terms of confirmation bias. Just to play devil's advocate really quick here, I'm not saying that confirmation bias is bad per se. I'm saying that it's overused. It may be overrated. If you think about it, obviously there are times where you want to rely on the good knowledge and the good wisdom and the good intelligence you already have inside of you, and it is the right answer, and it is the truth, and it is accurate, and it is the right thing to pull upon. You don't want to always be naively in, curious, open wonder of the world and totally uncertain about what's true and what's not and what's real and what isn't. That doesn't always work. But in an area of life where we're stuck, where we're suffering, where we're frustrated, where we're getting the same freaking result and we hate it, maybe it's worth it to challenge these deeply held assumptions, these deeply held convictions about this is how it has to be, this is how it always is, always was, always will be. Maybe it's useful and right in those moments to really loosen up that grip a bit and just put it down, step outside of that point of view and challenge ourselves and be like, is that really true? What else is also true here? What else might be true? And what else, even if it's not quote unquote true, might be a better point of view or a better perspective to have. Sometimes we get hung up on the truth, I think, which is ironic that I'm saying that in a podcast where we're pursuing truth. But sometimes we get hung up on a truth in a way that's rigid or dogmatic and really slows us down from just finding a functional way of being that's better. And a quick note, I also want to say that confirmation bias is one of the ways that we are most cruel to each other. See, we so often make up our minds about other people prematurely or based on an old set of information. We slot people in categories. We project our opinions and our misconceptions on them, and then we keep them there. And anything they do gets interpreted and filtered back through that particular lens or that particular perspective, and we never cut people the chance to grow, to evolve, or to re-educate us about who they might actually be in more kind of fidelity and more clarity and detail. And if we rigidly hold to these opinions and these judgments and these dogmas about other people, it's cruel. It hurts other people. It's incredibly painful to be on the receiving end of. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this podcast at some point has been on the receiving end of someone who just made up their minds about you and would not change it for the life of them, and treated you unfairly, were cold, were harsh, were rude, maybe even slandered you or shit talked you, or, really kind of took it to the social reality, rather than just a personal one-on-one reality. And I just want to submit this idea to you guys that I think it's one of the most cruel things we can do to beat up other people with our opinions of them, to lock them in a crappy, shitty box or a shitty version of the world, and not contribute to their growth, not help them see themselves, not help them to develop the best parts of themselves, not do anything to inspire or encourage or just allow that person to be where they're at, but instead we judge them and we lock them in a box of opinion, and we don't even give them the opportunity to ever get out. I think it's cold-hearted, and it's all too common. It's something that just happens all the time in the social reality, and that's also a function of confirmation bias. So let's summarize really quick. So confirmation bias stops personal growth, locks you in a narrow view of the world that might be outdated or inaccurate, blocks you from your childlike wonder and innocence and experiencing the beauty of the world, becomes a source of pain and stuckness and limitation in your life, becomes a source of pain and suffering for interpersonal relationships when we project confirmation bias onto other people. It's pretty clear that there are a lot of downsides to this evolutionary wiring we have, which is there to help us speed up and simplify our thinking so that we know right from wrong, safe from not safe, good from bad. It's a pretty big price to pay. And so I really think, just in summary, like I said, that this is the one operative factor. That if I could boil all of personal development down to one thing to overcome, to conquer, to learn to master in yourself, I really think this is it. It's learning to recognize and work with your own confirmation bias. Learn how to challenge it, learn how to open up past it, and really open up to life, to empower your own growth, to empower new ways of being so that you can allow your nervous system to operate in new ways that bring you more of what you want in your life, that bring you more happiness, that bring you more joy, more health, more well-being, more peace, more strength, more vitality, more whatever it is that you're seeking. I think all of it exists when we get outside of the rigid pattern that we're normally kind of constricted into by our own habituation. So I guess I'll just leave the conversation on this note, and then we'll wrap up here. What would life be like on the other side? What is life like on the other side of dropping this process of confirmation bias? What is life like when we allow new information to be new information and we don't try to fit it into what we think we already know? And instead, we just meet it on its own terms, live and direct in the moment. What is life like when we aren't so busy reinforcing our sense of self through this process of confirmation bias, but instead we hold our sense of self loosely. We recognize it's just a narrative, it's just one interpretation of our life experiences, and instead we're constantly allowing ourselves to be updated with new information and new experience. What would that be like? And would that lead to a better life? And I guess that's where I want to leave it for now with you guys. I suspect that this conversation will have ended up being longer than I anticipated it to be. I know I have a tendency to ramble sometimes. I'm working on communicating clearly and concisely, but I would love some feedback from you guys on whether or not this was too long, if this was too rambly, if this made sense, if this was too heavy, if this was not deep enough, if you want to go deeper, what it is that you got out of this podcast. I'd love to hear about it. And I have more good stuff on the way. 2019 is going to be a kick-ass year for this podcast and for this conversation. And I'm really grateful to have you aboard for it. And I look forward to sharing more with you. The next couple podcasts are probably going to be about values and understanding the world. How can we see the world more clearly through the lens of values? It's pretty deep exploration. I'm actually going to do 2 episodes on values because it's so key. It's so important to understanding yourself and the world around you and personal growth and how to really take ownership of your personal growth. And it's a game changer. It's an amazing topic. I'm really excited to share it with you guys. And then we'll go from there. I've got more ideas. I'm certainly open to feedback. If you guys have any questions, any subject suggestions, these first few podcasts are kind of going to be a deep dive, and for sure we are going to be courageously looking at stuff from the deepest level possible and really exploring profound ideas in the podcast throughout the whole time. But along the way, I will want to pepper in more kind of lighthearted, interesting, different takes on exploring life too. So just so you know, it's not always going to be so heavy. This is just kind of a deep dive for our first episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know what you think. And until next time,